design organization, the marketing design organization, and also Asana's brand. But overall, I've been working in and outside of enterprise and consumer, kind of going back and forth over the course of my career, 15 to 20 years. And it's a great time to be building enterprise products, and it wasn't always that way. And so if you look at like the design evolution of a lot of different companies like QuickBooks, certainly they started with desktop, and then they iterated and iterated and iterated, and there wasn't a lot of, real up-leveling of design quality until, more recent years. And it's the same thing with Salesforce, where, there was the kind of generic enterprise look, and then in more recent years, they kind of really up-leveled the quality of their visual language. Same thing with Microsoft Office, and then SAP is another good example. And so more and more you're seeing designers really making a shift from consumer to enterprise design, and being more and more excited to work on enterprise products. And so why are so many enterprise software companies investing in better product design? The answer is that there's a lot of newer entrants in the SaaS space. So when I was, prior to Asana, I was at Intuit, and I was tasked with redesigning the QuickBooks product. And one of the big initiatives or reasons why we were tasked with redesigning QuickBooks was because of the competitive threat of Xero. And Xero's tagline was beautiful accounting software. And so I was asked to make our accounting software beautiful as well. But you see a lot of these SaaS companies coming in, and they have to build the product from scratch anyway. And so they're starting over and rebuilding and making things beautiful and elegant. And then you see people migrating from migrating to web from desktop. That certainly was the case at QuickBooks, where we knew we had a lot of people on our desktop app and we needed to move people to the online version. And so how to do that in a way that they will not abandon QuickBooks, but will stick with us, became a big mantra, and we wanted to make sure to do that in a way that was good for the user, and that they chose us and chose our web version. And so you see this with, Office and other products as well, where slowly but surely we're all moving to the web. And then one of the other things that I noticed is that, years ago, you would hear people say like, well, yeah, I'm going to use my mobile phone for consumer stuff, but we don't really imagine that people are going to use the mobile for enterprise tasks. And just like you see with every other thing around mobile, it's turning out that people are absolutely willing to use their phone to do enterprise tasks, and that there's even a trend of mobile usage eating into web usage. So people are choosing to do tasks on their phone instead of going to a web when they have the choice. And so for that reason, you have people creating brand new mobile-first web applications, and when you start mobile-first, you inevitably create a cleaner and simple user interface. At Asana, in particular, we really needed to focus on design, because a lot of people choose our product without ever dealing with a salesperson or talking to support. So 2/3 of our users choose Asana independently and become paid customers without ever talking to anyone. And so our product needs to speak for itself, and it needs to be compelling enough for people to figure out, learn, and adopt on its own. And there's lots of other reasons as well. Great design helps to reduce support costs. Customer expectations are rising, so we're shifting back and forth between Facebook and Twitter and Google, and then our enterprise applications all throughout the day. And if one is drastically less compelling than the others, it's really, really noticeable. And also, stickiness is a thing of the past. It isn't as hard as it used to be to make a switch. And certainly when you have a world where the CFO or a C-level executive is mandating enterprise software, then you're kind of forced to use it. But more and more people are getting to choose the software that they use at work, and that means that there's not as much stickiness. And enterprise companies are knowing that lifetime value comes over the long haul, and they need people to stay engaged and to stay committed to the product over the long term. And so, you know, a lot of people ask, where should we invest design and engineering resources? You know, we can't invest in everything, we can't fix every problem, but what are the things that I particularly have found to be a good ROI? And so for me, the things that I have found to really make a difference are investing in brand, investing in new user experience, simplified navigation, great mobile experiences, and performance in offline mode. And I'll talk a little bit about each one. So for brand, there's a lot of great enterprise brands out there now. People are really getting that they need to make a personal connection with users and that they can have that same kind of brand engagement with an enterprise product as they do with a consumer brand. So here's an example of what one of the websites that I redid at Intuit. This is what our marketing experience looked like before, and then this is what it looked like after our redesign. And we just wanted to make sure that it was like really clean and that the navigation was really clear. We wanted it to feel more modern, but also really authentic, you know? So we made a commitment that we would use real QuickBooks employees in the context of their work environment for all of our photography rather than stock photography. And so you start with an emotional connection and then you back that up with a product promise and details about the product. We also took a look at the logo, and when I joined, there was quite a lot of different logos being used and not a lot of consistency. And so the design organization worked to kind of redesign the QuickBooks logo and create a mark that was modern and more iconic, and also one that worked really well on mobile. At Asana, when I joined, you know, this was sort of the marketing experience, which is, you know, good and fine, but it wasn't as differentiated as we wanted it to be. And so this is where we landed afterwards, which was like clean, simple, really highlighting the product and what it's used for, and sort of a mix of like a clean white canvas with bursts of energy to make the product seem really approachable. Here's a couple of other views. And we also invested in creating a brand video to really highlight the benefit of our product. We redesigned the Asana logo, and so this was the logo when I joined, a very kind of, I would argue, sort of masculine and generically enterprise logo, 3 dots on the right that sort of maybe represented items in a list. And when we thought about these dots, we knew we wanted the logo to evolve, but we didn't want it to be a total reinvent. But we wanted our logo to represent 3 members of a team working together. And so we started iterating and thinking about how the 3 dots could be reshaped. And we ended up with this as our logo mark. And then here it is with the word mark as well. And so beyond brand, another thing that's really important is new user experience. And the example that I like to give here is one of the things that ended up being surprising for me at QuickBooks is we tested 3 different first use experiences when we redesigned QuickBooks. There was one first use experience that was extremely short, where you basically answer a few questions and get right into the product. And then there was a second first use experience that was sort of medium in length, where you answer a few questions and we show you this page. And people always say that first use experiences should be as short as possible and that you should minimize steps. But we actually found that when we added this step, the conversion went up. And so really what's happening here is we're asking you on a previous page, what industry are you in and where are you located? And then we have this sort of animation where we scan our database and find the number of QuickBooks users worldwide, the number of people that are in your industry, and the number of people that are in your industry and also in your location. And then we customize QuickBooks for you and just sort of have this list of things that we're telling you we're customizing. The reality is that we can do this instantly on behalf of the customer without showing them this page. But when we showed them this page, it reinforced for users that they had made the right choice by choosing QuickBooks because they were obviously joining the industry leader. Wow, there's already 442,000 people who've made the same choice I just made. I must have done the right thing. And then it also gave the perception that we did a lot of work for them, and so they were already ahead of the game in using QuickBooks, where they would kind of have to start from scratch with another tool. So we ended up launching with this version and including this page in the first use experience. So tips for creating a good first use experience. I like to avoid lengthy tours. I think that people come in with a whole lot of confidence and they tend to click away from the tours, but I like to provide help later because people will end up having questions later on, but they want to kind of get started right away. You want to ensure that your user can complete a core task in their first visit. There's nothing more disappointing than coming into a product and answering a bunch of personal information about yourself and then leaving without having really gotten anything done. It doesn't instill a sense of confidence that I can continue to use the product and succeed. You also want to give your users an aha moment that communicates the core value of your product. This is particularly important for Asana, where a lot of people are wondering like exactly what is Asana and how does this fit in with the other tools that I use. But it's important for everyone to think about how you can show people how this product is going to improve and fit within the context of everything else that they're doing, and so that they can get that feeling of value from the product. Ensure that your first use experience supports your brand. So again, it's important to define your brand and then use the first use experience to be like the first conversation that you're having with your customer and make it feel human. Make sure that people get a sense of your unique personality of your company. Don't ask for information you don't need. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And then give clear next steps. So after I finish my core task, what is the next thing I'm going to do? I need to always, in the same way that if I'm playing a video game, I need to always know what the next level is. I need to always know what the next step is in a first use experience. The other thing that I think is critically important when redesigning an enterprise application is simplified navigation. So in both the redesign of QuickBooks and the redesign of Asana, navigation was about half of the design exercise. People will think of the product's navigation as kind of the guiding light of the product. And if the navigation is complicated, they'll perceive that the whole product is complicated. So this is Asana when I joined, and I knew that we were going to be doing a redesign and was excited about that. And so the navigation here was pretty complex. It was our biggest net promoter detractor was that the product felt very complicated and hard to figure out. We had all of our navigation located in this left nav, which had multiple layers of hierarchy and complexity. And when we redesigned, this was the navigation that we launched with. Much, much simpler and cleaner, and really focusing the user on the task at hand rather than having them worry about complicated navigation. We used a top navigation bar, which gave people personalized views of their Asana, and then the ability to create and search within Asana from anywhere in the application. Similarly, when I was at QuickBooks, this is what the product looked like before I joined. And here there was a lot of tabs in a tab structure, and there was literally 72 tabs in the application. On the left, you can see that there's even a tab that just says more with a drop down. And so it was just like a ton of complex tabs, and you're always searching around to try and figure out where the page you need is located. And when we redesigned, this is what we landed on, which had just 7 tabs along or 8 tabs along the left. And a user could come into the application and literally click down the left nav and get a general sense of what the product was for and how it worked. So tips for simplifying navigation. Think about how best to structure the information in your application. Be sure to provide a homepage that becomes a navigation hub for your product, so this place that you can keep getting to. I like to use the top global navigation to access key views of information across categories. You'll notice that the QuickBooks navigation and Asana navigation aren't actually all that different. Like most applications, you're kind of going to want a create menu at the top and a search menu at the top, and then you're going to want a place for help on the right. So just using those normal paradigms that people are used to again and again in all the applications they use, so that the product you're creating feels dependable and familiar. And then use left navigation to identify groups or folders of information. Another thing that's important is great mobile experiences. I hesitate to even call this out as a separate thing because we consider mobile to just be our product. But there are a few things that I think about with mobile specifically that I thought I would call out. So here's just an example of some of the mobile apps that I think are pretty successful. Slack is certainly great with mobile, Google, and a couple of Asana views as well. At Intuit, we focused mobile very concretely on data input use cases. So how can we use image capture so that you can have expense capture? So I take a picture of a receipt, it becomes an expense without having to enter in data with my hands. And then if I take a picture of a business card, that becomes the contact. So just sort of making things feel as frictionless as possible. Some tips for developing great mobile experiences. Don't feel the need to duplicate all functionality in the mobile app. I think a lot of people have that tendency, and it's just not necessary. With QuickBooks, we needed to launch an iPad app at one point, and there was no way to put all QuickBooks functionality into the iPad app. You have to launch with something and you have to start small. And so we started with just one common use case, which was invoicing. So really the first version of QuickBooks for iPad really only allowed you to create an invoice and send it to a customer. It wasn't the full QuickBooks product at all, but it got us off to a good start and it solved one problem really well. And then we were able to expand from there. You want to ensure your visual patterns and your iconography are consistent between the mobile app and your product as much as possible, because if I take the time to download the mobile app, I don't really want to have to learn a bunch of new stuff. I want to take what I've learned on the web app and apply it to the mobile. The other thing I get asked a lot is, do you need to launch features on both mobile and web in parallel? And not necessarily. I mean, I think a lot of times launching first on mobile and gathering learnings is a good way to go. And then if something is successful, applying it to web is a good way. You want to leverage device advantages like contact lists, location, camera, etc., and try and reinvent traditional web interactions. And think carefully about how to infuse your brand into mobile as well. At Asana, we spent a lot of time on that and actually ended up getting a brand infusion award from Google from the Material Design Award. And design with the assumption that some of your users will use only your mobile app. This is something that's always surprising for me. A lot of enterprise companies will think that the mobile app is a companion, but it isn't necessarily the case. Some people start with mobile, and if they're able to get their stuff done, they don't bother using the web app. Other important considerations overall, offline mode. You really think about, what are the things that people are going to want to do on your phone, even if they don't have access to the internet, and how can you allow them to get work done and then sync later. Performance, and this is, important on both web and mobile apps, but so often with enterprise software, you end up seeing the spinner. We see it, certainly at Asana, we're working on performance, but I see it with Slack, see it with Google Apps. When you're online, you're always struggling with performance, and people do get upset if they have to wait for long periods of time. And then monetization. I mean, there's a lot of art and science to figuring out which parts of your product should be accessible for free. What do you offer for free? And then when do you, try to convert people to paid? How do you organize your tiers, et cetera? Really investing in that is obviously a key to helping users understand the product and the value it provides, and then also critically important for the business. And customization. I have tended to undervalue customization personally. I think it's because as a designer, I don't really like it when the user changes the look of the product. I like to be in charge of the look of the product. But people, especially people who are working in a product all day, every day for work, they want to be able to tailor the product visually. They want to be able to turn on and turn off features and really customize and make the product their own. And so the next part of this presentation is me just sort of diving in more deeply on the two redesign case studies that I've been most familiar with, which is the Asana redesign that I worked on, and then prior to that, the QuickBooks redesign. So I'll go through a little bit of the journey for both of those companies. So first, Asana. As I mentioned, when I joined Asana, this is what the product looked like, and we were really looking to improve that Net Promoter Score. This is what our design language was, and frankly, our design language just wasn't very differentiated. So as there becomes more and more enterprise companies in, as the enterprise space becomes more and more crowded, we weren't telling a unique story. Here's some of our, competitive landscape, and everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody looks the same. People in the context of their office environment, and then this kind of blue teal color as the corporate color. And so I wanted to take a step back at Asana and help them to define the brand before we did the product redesign. And so we did collaborative exercises where we got people across the company together to help talk about what felt on brand and what felt off brand, and really to have rich discussions where there was disagreement. So you might talk about colors, and some people would say like, well, this color is on brand, and somebody else would say that the same color is off brand, and then you'd say, well, great, let's talk about that. Why? And you use that to kind of bring everybody around to alignment and then to begin to document. I like to think of a brand like a person. And so when I'm defining a brand, the first thing I want to do is define the brand story or brand narrative. If you're meeting somebody for the first time, you're going to ask like, well, what's your name? Where are you from? What do you do for a living? Where did you go to school? And you're essentially trying to build a story about that person and to categorize them in your mind. And people want to do the same thing with brands. And so our brand narrative is do great things together. At our core, we want people to feel a sense of teamwork from Asana. And so our core brand narrative harkens back to that sense of people accomplishing things and feeling great as a team. And so the next thing you want to think about is like, what words, if my brand was a person, what words would I use to describe Asana? And that's your brand attributes. And so our brand attributes are empowering, purposeful, quirky, and approachable. By empowering, we mean motivating, encouraging, and enabling. A company outside of Asana that would be empowering might be Kickstarter, because they are focused a lot on the people who are starting campaigns within Kickstarter. They're not focused on themselves. A company that might be considered purposeful would be Patagonia, where they think about the entire supply chain of their of building and creating clothing, and that the labor they use is all fair labor, the materials are all organic materials, and that they're very thoughtfully thinking about every step of the way. And Asana wants to operate in that way as well. And then approachable is, I would consider Zappos to be a company that's really approachable. When you shop for shoes on Zappos, you can click on a video and you see a real Zappos employee talking about the shoe. You feel like you get to know the company a little bit better every time you shop there. And their language just feels very human and kind and almost humorous. And then quirky, a company that I would consider to be quirky would be like MailChimp. They have a pretty, their product is not that fun, but they make it fun through their brand. Asana strives to be quirky, but we like to do it in unexpected and subtle ways. We definitely don't want to be as overt about it as like a MailChimp is. And so then the last sort of thing to do when you're defining a brand is to define a brand motif. And so a brand motif is sort of like, what is the clothing that I wear such that people would describe me as purposeful, empowering, approachable, and quirky? What is my visual style? And so our brand motif is clarity and energy. Everything that the design team puts out should be a balance of a clean white canvas that gives an undistracted picture of your team's work and the ability to approach it with ease, punched in with bursts of vibrancy and color that celebrate your accomplishments and the progress that you're making. And once we had all of that brand defined, we were able to take a look and break all of the product into pieces and then redesign each of those pieces. And so this is an example of our design language system with an emphasis on that clarity and energy, the clean white canvas with bursts of energy and color. This is our color system. We wanted to have just like very clean and neutral colors. We wanted to move away from that teal that everyone is using in enterprise and to have a brand color, which we call corange, which is this sort of coral orange color. And to be really thoughtful about how we use color in the product and make sure that it conveys meaning. This is our brand color Corange, and we use it in our new user experience to welcome users into the product, and also whenever you create something new in Asana. And then we went through the process of sort of looking at the product experience and figuring out how best to redesign the product. One of the things that was a huge challenge for us at Asana was that we did not have the ability to launch just to new users. When I redesigned QuickBooks, we launched to new users only, made sure that it was working for new users, and then migrated existing users over the course of a year. When I explained that at Asana, they were very much like, oh man, we cannot wait a year before migrating existing users. We've got to launch to everybody. And so it forced us to be really creative in the way that we dealt with the redesign, which is that we made all of the UI changes on a piece-by-piece basis in the old visual style, and at the end when we launched the redesign, we just launched the reskin. So on the left you see old Asana, and then you see us putting in the top bar, the simplified left navigation, and then the simplified center pane, and on the right is the new visual style. And this is what the product looked like before, and this is what the product looked like after the redesign. And so what we had a lot of good results from the redesign. Less than 2% of existing users opted out of it, which meant that we were able to move everybody over to the redesigned version of Asana within 6 weeks. We had an increase of about 10% on adoption funnel metrics. Collaboration rate for new domains increased 15% or so. We won some design awards, and we scaled our design team up very quickly. So once you have a strong design structure, then you're able to attract really strong designers, which is important to maintain it going forward. We also had a really, the Net Promoter Score was the key thing that we were looking to improve. This is Asana's Net Promoter Score over the lifetime of the company. And as you can see, the rebrand was the largest Net Promoter jump that we had for Asana over the course of their company history. And so that's a little bit of the story of Asana, and now we'll go into the details of the QuickBooks redesign story. So here was a very different situation where we had a lot of separate departments. We had a payroll team and a payments team and a QuickBooks team and an accountant group, and they each had their own separate design team, and they each had their own separate general manager. And so what we got out of that was a bunch of separate apps that didn't look consistent, didn't have a thread of consistency across the board. And so if I picked up one product, I wouldn't necessarily add other products over time. And obviously that's a problem for the business. And then, as I mentioned before, our navigation was really complicated, but also if you just went from tab to tab, you'd see inconsistent design patterns even within one of the products, which is QuickBooks Online. And so, rather than going through a rebrand, I wanted to just create some success criteria for the design language system to, again, bring everybody together around what our goals were and what success was going to look like. And also to define design principles for all of the small business products. We created a roadmap so that we could, this is, in this project, the organization was around 60 designers. Asana had 6 designers when I joined, so the scale here is much larger because it's a much larger company. And so in a really large company, You are managing the feedback that you're getting and managing decision-making across several business units, and defining the roadmap and making clear when reviews are going to happen and when things are going to be locked down is a critical part of making sure that you make your deadlines. I wanted to make sure that we would create a design language system that would work for anything that the small business organization would want to create going forward. So we asked design leads across each of the different business units to come up with 7 or 8 hero flows. What are the things that must be done across all of our products well in order for users to succeed? And so we came up with these, the first use experience, managing customers, employees, et cetera, et cetera. And it was like, if our design language can solve for these things only, then it probably works for anything that we're going to come up with in the future. And then we created new wireframes for each of those 7 flows only, and used those as a template for the design language. And so this is the design language that we came up with based on breaking apart the components from those 7 flows. Here's some patterns to display data. And this is the product as it was finished. In order to simplify the navigation, we had to create more of an object-oriented approach to the product. So if you were, for example, going to create an invoice, you should be able to click on the plus icon, and the invoice would come over the top of the application like an object, and you could finish and then go back to the homepage hub. So here's an example of that, like transaction browser, or that invoice coming down from on top of the application. Another thing that we did a lot of testing around was creating electronic invoices. So prior to the redesign, you would, as a small business, you would send an invoice and it would be a PDF, and a person receiving that invoice in PDF form would look at it and see the due date and wait 30 days to pay the invoice, or sometimes maybe even longer. But with electronic invoicing, we experimented a lot around the Chrome on this, so that, we ended up launching with like a really large price and then a pay now button right at the right. And we had a much higher likelihood of people clicking pay now the day they received the invoice, which is absolutely huge for small businesses' cash flow. This is another idea that we came up with. So again, like, not something that you really have to do with an accounting application, but we just see over and over again that the more you let people customize in an enterprise application, the more engaged and connected to it they feel. And so here, if you upload your logo, we would scan the colors in your logo and we would customize the colors in your invoice to match your logo automatically. So this is what QuickBooks looked like before, and this is what it looked like after the redesign. And again, we had a lot of good results from this, in that we, on the mobile side, we're looking at App Store ratings and ensuring that our App Store rating exceeded our biggest competitor on the accounting side, on the payment side, and also on the payroll side. On the web side, we're looking at, how many users are we getting and how fast is the application growing? Are we having an increase in conversion to paid in the US, but also internationally? Are people completing a task in their first visit, and what does the overall net promoter look like? And then a huge increase in attach on payments, so people coming into QuickBooks and then turning on payroll and payments in a higher rate than they did before. And also, because the product was simpler and easier to figure out, our call volume reduced quite a bit. And so, to wrap things up, I'll just sort of talk a little bit about my perspective on how enterprise products go from being good to great. I think it's a really interesting time for enterprise designers, because we're no longer in a place where all we need to do is redesign products from something that seems kind of dated and stodgy to something that seems modern and clean. We're going to hit a point here pretty soon where all enterprise products look pretty clean. They look as good as consumer products do. So in a nutshell, I feel that it won't be enough to have a tool that looks clean or that works. I think that we're going to need to focus on the emotional side of work apps and create tools that make it feel better to be working. So what are some examples of that? This is an example that I found really inspiring. Obviously, I was looking at Xero a lot when I was working on the QuickBooks redesign. And one of the things that Xero has is this way of matching expenses and reconciling expenses that feels a little bit like a game. So if you match the expense and you click, you have this like kind of exciting moment where you feel the expense go away and you feel that your work is being accomplished. And people would say to me, you know, I really feel like I love using Xero because I love kind of clicking and seeing these expenses match up, and reconciliation feels fun to me because it feels a bit like a game. And then I think, you know, Slack obviously does a great job of creating a really personal and emotional experience where, you know, you type in and talk to Slackbot and he feels like a person that's talking back to you. At Asana, we spent a lot of time thinking about how we could increase collaboration and increase task completion simply with fun animations. And so if you heart a task in Asana, there's a glow that happens and a real moment of appreciation there. If you complete a task, again, it's like a real ownable moment, and we take a second to celebrate with you. We try to do things in Asana like we have loading screen phrases that are silly and whimsical, like feed the unicorns. And we even have a feature in Asana where randomly, if you complete a task, a unicorn or a narwhal or some other mystical creature will fly across the screen. And it sounds silly, it sounds almost ridiculous to do these things. But this has been one of the largest word of mouth growth drivers for Asana, and people will tell me all the time, like, today I got 2 unicorns, I was so excited. So these things that help to kind of make work fun and make work seem like it's a personal and emotional thing, I think are going to be the real differentiators. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Yeah, Amanda, this is fantastic. Going through some of the principles here that sort of will really influence the evolution of enterprise product design, right? And how you kind of apply these existing principles to your work at QuickBooks and at Asana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've got a lot of great questions. I'm gonna just run the last poll of the conference here while we get through some of these questions.
Okay.
And yeah, let's get right to it. We've got a ton of questions here. So I think the first question we've got, and this is very relevant for especially in enterprise design, and I remember this was something that you had briefly touched on in the ebook, but now that design is starting to be more valued in enterprises,
yeah.
how might you see that affecting the enterprise sales model? Because traditionally, the enterprise sales model has been very top down, right? You've got account executives who sell to these IT buyers. How do you see the influence of design kind of changing that sales model a bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as I mentioned with, you know, certainly with QuickBooks, they have like a 30-day free trial. And so they're having you kind of get into the product and try it out for 30 days before you convert to paid. Asana has a very bottoms-up model, and so we offer our product for free, and the vast majority of our users just try it out on their own, and then they convert to paid over time as they find value out of the product. And we've been very, very lenient and flexible and put a lot of functionality into the free version because we want people to get engaged and invite others. And we know that we'll be able to monetize over the long haul. And so when you do that, you have to have good design because people are choosing voluntarily to use your product. One of the challenges that Asana faces and that a lot of companies face is that we personally have designed our product to be very focused on a project manager, a person who starts to get overwhelmed, or like a team manager, so somebody who is managing lots of different projects. And our product is very, very valuable for that person, but where we're focusing in the next year is more around the invited users, the people who get assigned a lot of tasks, but they're not project managers. So maybe they're reporting to that manager, or maybe they're part of the project. And what we're fine-tuning is that virtuous circle of as a project manager, I get overwhelmed. I set up Asana, I invite people, they complete tasks, they feel appreciated for the work that they do by the project manager, and they get more tasks. And so creating that loop and making sure that that loop is reinforcing is really important. And it takes good design to do that. So yeah, there's I think fewer and fewer companies that are getting away with the tops down model. Another example that I talk about a lot is, I at one point had a conversation with the head of brand at Dropbox, and she was talking to me about their first version of the enterprise Dropbox. And they started being a consumer tool, but I think they really deserve the credit for turning things around for enterprise companies in a lot of ways, because you found at a lot of large companies, employees would start using Dropbox at work because they were tired of dealing with their servers or figuring things out with IT. And IT departments could not control the use of Dropbox. And so Dropbox created this enterprise version. And when they created the enterprise version, they took all the heart and soul away from it. They removed all the illustrations and they made it seem very businessy because it's a business product. And the usage of the enterprise version of Dropbox just wasn't what they wanted it to be. And so they had to go back to the drawing board and add in all those fun illustrations, like the little rainbow that they have, the things that they considered to be kind of silly and frivolous and very consumer. And when they did that, usage of the enterprise product increased. So I love that example for two reasons. One is that you're finding that users are going to decide what they're using and they're going to make the choice. And if your design isn't good, then they're not going to use your product, and you can't really enforce it at companies anymore. And then the other side of it is that traditional thought of what enterprise look is not really successful in resonating with people. And what designers are realizing and companies are realizing is that people are still people at work. They still have a sense of humor at work. They still feel feelings at work, and they want their user experiences to be as fun and engaging as they would be if they were on Twitter or Snapchat or any other consumer tool that they're using.
Right. And I think that's actually a great sort of segue into our next question, which is, you mentioned that designing for emotion, right, is sort of this next evolution in enterprise design. Now, how might somebody adapt this for industries that are just inherently serious and complex by nature? Like, let's say, fintech, right, trading on a product that helps brokers, watch the market and make smart trades, or a product for doctors at a hospital who are dealing in very serious situations, literally like life and death situations, right? In those scenarios, does the value of emotional design require a bit of a different interpretation and implementation?
No, it really doesn't. So here's the way I would handle any situation like that. And I've worked for Wells Fargo and handled brand for them. And believe me when I say that financial products are extremely emotional. If you're looking at your mortgage payment or your bill payments, it feels personal because it's your financial situation with your family. It's your ability to kind of fulfill your dreams. So I guess what I would ask a medical company or any kind of enterprise company is, with your users, what is the emotion that they are feeling that you can tap into? What is their ideal emotion? So if I actually happen to have a mother who has cancer, and so for her, like the applications that she uses to manage her healthcare, there's zero emotion in them, but she's feeling a lot of emotions, and when she has a good day with a doctor, it feels really good. And when she has a bad day with a doctor, it doesn't feel good. So I would ask, how can you have that bedside manner in your product experience? A really tactical example, I don't know how many people on the phone or on the call have ever used paperless post. Paperless post is an invitation service. And I feel like there's two categories of people. There's people who have not heard of paperless post, and there's people who always use paperless post. But what it is it's a more beautiful and elegant and amazing version of Evite, really, where you create an invitation and you can choose your colors and your design and the envelope. And when you send your invitation, the user receives an email, they click on it, and then you watch this animation of an envelope opening and your personalized invitation unfolding, and then you can say, yes, I'm going to come, or no, I'm not going to come, kind of a thing. And when I saw that, I immediately thought of payroll, because I was working at QuickBooks on the time, and we thought, like, gosh, can we make the moment of opening your paycheck feel like that? It's an honorable moment. I just earned 2 weeks worth of pay. And why is it just like a line in my bank statement? Why isn't it something that I open up where the company that is employing me can share a moment with me and say, like, thank you for the work that you've done? So I think there's always a way to tap into the emotion of a situation. And the successful companies are the ones that identify that and make that important and execute on that. Even with Square, they're accepting payments, but they have this situation where you have to sign in Square, and it creates this personal moment between the person you're buying from and the person who's paying. And I think that's a key to the success of that product as well.
Right, right. And I think this kind of goes back to, again, something that you mentioned earlier, which was that even in the enterprise, it's still just people at work, right? And it's really kind of just focusing in on the different sort of emotional requirements and states, even as they are at work, even doing things that seem boring on the surface.
Yeah, I mean, we don't work in a world where people like put on their suits and carry their briefcases. They're like, everybody wears the exact same thing at work that they do at home, and and then B, I mean, I need to have more levity at work than I do at home. At home, I can do whatever I want, but at work, it's kind of tense and stressful sometimes. So you actually have more of a responsibility to put things in the product that help people feel good, because they're not doing whatever they want to do. They're at work.
Right, right, exactly. And now we actually have a really, this is a pretty interesting question, which is, if you could only describe the future of enterprise design in sort of one short sentence, right? How would you describe that if you had to explain it sort of just very quickly to somebody?
Yeah, I think it's sort of that last, statement that I made in the presentation, which is that it's not enough to just be a useful tool, but to be a tool that makes it feel good to be working.
Right. Gotcha. And now going back to the case studies that you described. So, person asked, and in his experience, the sales and marketing team always wants the users to sort of give more information than is really needed, right, in order to try a product or to use the product. And in your case, how did you guys handle that at both QuickBooks and Asana? So sort of thinking about that very first initial touch point of the user with the product and how much information they would have to give to basically start a trial of the product.
Yeah. Well, in neither QuickBooks nor Asana, the sales team wasn't really a factor because it isn't that kind of product. Like you really come to the website and you sign up for Asana or you sign up for QuickBooks. You don't deal with a salesperson per se. So we don't, at Asana, we certainly hear from salespeople, hey, we'd probably be able to sell more of Asana if it had this feature or that feature. And so we have to kind of work with the sales team to balance their desire for us to just have every feature you can possibly have with our need to be a product that's very simple for new users. What I do a lot of is A/B testing, right? So if we have if we have two versions of the first use experience and one asks you for 10 things and one asks you for 5 things, and the conversion is same on both, then awesome. Let's ask for the 10 things. It's not like I don't want to gather user data. But if you see conversion go down, then I think the sales team and the marketing team need to understand that we're trying to balance business value with customer value. And the customer is not going to give you a bunch of information before they've even done anything in the product, is what I think.
Right. And actually, going back to your redesign case studies, so how did you guys sort of reorient users into the redesign? Because as with any redesign, right, you have a large base of existing users and you don't want to alienate them. So how did you guys approach basically making the redesign new but also familiar?
Yeah, so with Asana, the way that we did that is that for users that were already in the product, the redesign happened to them over the course of 6 months in slow rollouts. So as an Asana user, I would come in and everything would be exactly the same, but I now would have a top bar at the top of the page that had like search and create in there. And so nothing moved around, but I now had something new that I didn't have before. And then we would A/B test that and make sure that task completion and collaboration and net promoter didn't go down as a result of that A/B test. And then we moved on to launching the left nav changes. And there it was, we did get some feedback that was like, hey, it seems like you've moved things around, but it was a small enough change that people were able to digest it and move on. And then with the left pane and the right pane, same thing. And so you're just sort of like piece by piece changing the design, such that when you kind of announce the redesign, all it was a visual refresh. At that point, it was like going from blue buttons that were dark blue to light blue, or nothing was moving around at that point, and the look and feel of the product was so much more modern that the feedback from users was overwhelmingly positive. Nobody liked the look and feel of the old language. So that's kind of how we rolled it out at Asana. QuickBooks is harder, we rolled it out for new users only, and then over the course of a year, migrated existing users over and we allowed people to opt in. And it was only toward the very end of the year that we started migrating people over. And for them, we had like training videos and deeper access to customer support and things like that.
Right.
We did also, for the redesign for both companies, completely overhaul the help sites so that they had all modern screenshots, all completely new text. We didn't launch the redesign with the old help sites,
Right, right. And actually going back to, again, parts of this redesign. So somebody was curious, in both of these redesigns, right, changing the navigation seemed to be a very core design decision here.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that that afterwards, you guys had saw that it had a high ROI. And he was curious if, in this case, were you guys able to gauge the ROI of that specific navigation decision, or did that just contribute overall to the success of the redesign, and you measured it on sort of more of a macro level?
Well, with QuickBooks, we measured conversion to paid at a macro level, and we measured sign-up rate conversion and leading indicator metrics like completing an invoice in your first visit or things like that. With Asana, since we broke up the navigation into just the top bar, just the left nav, and then the center pane stuff, we could quantitatively measure the impact of each of those changes individually. There were times when we launched versions of the left nav that were losses, and we had to roll back and tune it and launch again. And so we ended up with a successful design through trial and error. And we approached each area of the navigation separately. One of the questions that I asked myself throughout the redesign is, if we had launched everything in aggregate all together, would it have been a bigger win or a bigger loss? I don't know, but we did it piece by piece.
Right, right. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the next question we actually have here looks at a different dimension of the project you talked about, which is really your relationship with the stakeholders, because we saw a lot of comments here where they were just amazed. They were just amazed at the overhaul that you were able to not just conceptualize, but actually implement through an enterprise organization, right? And that's in of itself is an accomplishment. And so they were curious, what was that relationship with stakeholders like? Was it partially their idea that these products needed to change? Was there a lot of sort of selling the ideas to them, especially for some of the quirkier things, like, for instance, you mentioned the little unicorn effect, right?
Yeah.
How were those effects sort of received by stakeholders, and maybe you could elaborate a bit on that.
Sure. So in both the QuickBooks product redesign and the Asana product redesign, I was brought in to do that project. I did not have to sell it to executives. In the case of QuickBooks, they were very much like, we know we need to redesign this. We've tried it several times, and now we need you to come in and facilitate this redesign. And they had tried to do it. I was lucky enough that by the time I was brought in to contribute to the project, they had tried to do the less expensive overhauls. They had tried to do what they called room by room redesign, where you clean up each tab one by one. And they had failed to finish, and there was a lot of problems there. So by the time I got there, they had already had that kind of come to Jesus moment where they're like, okay, this whole thing needs to change, and we need to, completely scrap it and start from scratch. And so I feel thankful that I was able to have all that latitude and a very large, multi-million-dollar budget on the case of the QuickBooks redesign to make it happen. On the Asana redesign, again, they kind of reached out to me and said, like, hey, we've seen that you've done this QuickBooks redesign, and we would love for you to come here and do it at Asana. And so I, again, knew that I would be coming in and that I had full support from the executive team, much smaller budget, so in the hundreds of thousands this time because it's a startup. And when I came in, they knew they wanted to do a product redesign, and they had just done this kind of brainstorming exercise with the design team, where they had come up with a bunch of different potential redesigns. And when I asked the design team, which one are you going to go with? Which one do you like? They didn't really know. And when I asked executives, which one are you going to go with? They didn't really know. And so what I realized at that point was that the designers were going to face a huge challenge because the company didn't know who it was. It didn't have a brand defined clearly. And so I did go to the executive team and say, hey, I won't extend the life of this project, but I want to split it out into two phases. I want, some of the product designers to work on the UI improvements, and then I want some of the designers to work on a visual language and define the brand. And we'll do those two things in parallel so we don't make the project take longer. But this work must be done in order for this company to scale and for everyone to know what personality we're conveying and who we are and who we aren't. And if we don't take the time to do that, we're going to regret it. And so there are certain parts of it that I had to make a case for. And it is hard. I mean, nobody wants to, for example, redo a logo. It's a totally painful process to redo a logo. But when you come to the point where you say, okay, we know for sure that our narrative is do great things together, and we know for sure that we want people to feel a sense of teamwork. Does this old logo say teamwork? Does it say do great things together? No, it doesn't. And users really respond when your brand is well defined and clear and crisp. They don't even maybe consciously know why, but we are all built to look at things that are inconsistent as untrustworthy and things that are consistent as trustworthy. And so it's really important to develop that. Now, in the case of the unicorns, that was something that an engineer put in as a hack, and it started out as something that you had to turn on and find, and some users found it, and then they shared it on Twitter, and it became this thing that people talked about. And then eventually we tested it in the first use experience. Half of the users got it by default and half of the people didn't get it. And the users who got unicorns by default had a greater tendency to convert to paid. So it was literally a business win, these unicorns in the product, and that's why we did it.
Wow, that's actually really interesting and really cool that you guys actually ran some sort of quantitative testing on that and could actually show that something as whimsical and as almost just kind of out of
ridiculous,
left field.
Honestly.
Yeah, as out of left field as unicorns could actually have some business impact. I think that's, and especially in the enterprise, like who could have predicted something like that?
Yeah.
And actually, that actually ties in well to the next question here, which is really about user research in general. And that is, so when you started to roll out these design changes, was there user research that was conducted to see if an incremental rollout versus an all-at-once rollout would work better? Or was that decision sort of just based on prior experience with these redesign launches?
Yeah, we certainly user tested each thing before we rolled it out, both with QuickBooks and with Asana. With QuickBooks, we had a lot of different, like each week, we would have all day long accountants in a conference room, and we would show accountants our experience and get their feedback. And so accountants really shared in the design of that product. And then with Asana, we used research to define the end state, and then we A/B tested each of the pieces and rolled them out one by one.
Gotcha. And I think since we are pushing up on the hour, we're going to take our last question here. And the last question is going back to design language and design system in general. And so the question here is about when you were working on both projects, was working on that design language and that design system some work that was done up front, and then you guys dove into the specifics of the product details, or did that happen on a sort of parallel track so that both kind of influenced each other?
Yeah, so in the case of QuickBooks, we thought about like the 7 most important use cases, and then we redesigned those in entirety, and then we broke that apart into pieces and redesigned just those pieces. And in doing that, we got about 80% of the components that you would need for any small business application. So it's sort of a chicken and egg. You kind of do it in parallel, I think.
Got it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, guys. It was a pleasure to kind of share everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you so much, Amanda. This was a fantastic presentation, and everybody here really found it useful. And we had a ton of questions, and unfortunately, we can't get to all of them. But I am going to put in the URL for our Slack group where the conversation continues with some of our members there. So for folks here in the audience, feel free to join or apply for product tribes if you have more than 3 years of experience in a product team. And yeah, it's pretty crazy. This is the last session of Enterprise UX Virtual Summit 2017. It has been such an honor to be able to present this event for the community. This is the largest design event in the history of design, with the number of registrants and attendees that we've gotten. So everybody here has sort of been a part of design history here, and it's been great to look at the conversations and the questions that everybody had. Yeah, Amanda, thanks again. This was such a great closing session. You know, both inspirational as well as practical for people here. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And for everybody else who joined us here, we hope to see you again in all of our future events, all of our future webinars, and of course, hopefully at Enterprise UX Virtual Summit 2018 next year. And with that being said, I just close the summit by saying, everybody have a great weekend. And on Monday, we're getting right back into to our work as enterprise designers. And thanks again, everyone. Amanda, have a great weekend.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, take care.